On this day in 2016, people in Britain voted to leave the European Union, an event known forevermore as Brexit. Well, 5 years ago, very few people were predicting that Brexit would pass. The results shocked much of Europe and the world. The Brexit referendum remains one of the most important news events that we have covered here at DW News. Here is a look back at the evening of June 23rd, 2016, and a reminder of what we were reporting the night that Brexit began.
About British identity, which is always funny, because they live on an island.
We really haven't had a story like this in our generation, have we? Someone is going to be crying this evening.
You think so?
In a few hours' time, we'll know the answer. I'm Brent Goff.
And my name's Christopher Springate.
And this is DW News. The UK decides.
We don't really know what that would look like or which direction different European countries would want to take, or indeed the EU institutions.
Yeah, but aren't you playing down the importance of the British with that, though? I mean, we've always talked about, and Michaela, correct me if I'm wrong, but we've always talked about the Berlin, Paris, London, you know, this axis here. This is what the EU feeds off of. And if we lose that, if we lose London, that's a third of everything.
Well, it also depends on which level you're talking about. Economically, Britain might take a hit, but so will Europe, and certainly will Germany. The UK is a vital export country that Germany exports into. So there is something to lose across the board. Whatever comes of this, something has been broken. The spell, if you like, of not questioning the European Union being in place has been broken just by posing this question.
Something has been broken. Wow. Well, you just saw him at the big table 5 years ago with me. He is with me again tonight, right here, John Worth. He is a Germany-based British political commentator and blogger. He has been a part of our Brexit coverage from day one. It's good to have you back in the studio for a change.
Glad to be back,
times.
perhaps.
What went through your mind, John, when you looked back, when you saw that clip there and you looked back at the coverage 5 years ago?
I remember being in this very studio that night and at some point dawning on me about 3 o'clock in the morning when the results came through that this is going really badly and that actually this could actually really happen. And we've still then been picking through all of the kind of consequences of that since. What I think none of us could really have known is on that evening we could have expected a bumpy ride over the 5 years to come, but perhaps not one that's been so politically difficult, so contorted as has come to pass.
Did you think that it would take so much time to go from the actual referendum being passed to when Brexit would finally be a reality?
I think that's hard to say, because we knew on one hand that trying to make a trade deal with the European Union is a time-consuming process. So at one level, Britain's actually solved that comparatively quickly. What I think we couldn't really predict is the amount of political breakdown that Britain has had to go through in order to manage to get to that point. And actually, no one's ever really tried to do anything like this before, so kind of negotiating when the clock is ticking. And I think we've only understood in the last 6 months that actually doing that under that time pressure is a really bad idea, because the British are now only beginning to discover actually a lot of these problems are a lot more difficult than they thought they would be when they were so confident that there would be benefits of Brexit.
When you look at the UK and the European Union since that fateful night 5 years ago, what do you think has changed the most?
I think Britain is still playing out that game about Brexit even now. Brexit dominates everything. It's even playing a role in Britain's coronavirus response. And so Britain, rather than being a political system which is between the traditional party of the left, the Labour Party, and the traditional party of the right, the Conservatives, has become essentially the Conservatives being the pro-Brexit party and everyone else wondering what to do about that. On the European Union side, it's a bit more complicated, it's a bit more nuanced. The European Union, at one level, stands actually in some things more united than it did back then 5 years ago, because all of the 27 remaining countries have said, hang on a minute, we don't actually want that. So they've looked at what Britain has had to confront and don't want to do that themselves. And in some things, again, the EU's coronavirus response, the EU's budget, the European Union is perhaps better placed today than was the case 5 years ago. But nevertheless, losing a big member state, 65 million people, the economic consequences, of course, that's going to be a major hit.
What about the names? David Cameron, Nigel Farage, Theresa May, the Speaker of the House of Commons, John Bercow, order!
Yeah.
No one talks about any of these people now. And we thought they were so important just a few years ago.
Right, but if you look at the leading characters in the Conservative Party, OK, Boris Johnson was at that time, back in 2016, a known character. But all of the other leading characters, particularly the Remain figures from the Conservative Party, have all been moved on. So the Conservative Party has moved more to the right, has become more nationalistic, and all of those Remain voices that there were around David Cameron, George Osborne as well, his finance minister, they've all been shuffled off as a result of the Brexit process. And also, if you look at what's happened, I think it's just even less time ago, just 2 years ago, we would have been sat here and probably would have thought of Theresa May as maybe a figure of some ridicule.
Right.
If we look at Theresa May now, she actually looks like she was actually, particularly with regard to Northern Ireland, so she was actually taking a rather sensible approach to Brexit in comparison to what came to pass with Boris Johnson.
We have heard many times that if a second referendum, Brexit referendum, were to be held, the Brits would vote to stay in the EU. Do you think that there will ever be a second referendum?
I think it's going to be a long road back. There was an opinion poll on that topic just came out today that said 48% of the British population think it was now the wrong decision, and only 40% think it was the correct decision, and then those in between don't know. But what's really important, you've got to ask, is would the European Union want this Britain back in at the moment? Because this is a British political system at the moment which is going through quite some contortions, has quite some difficulties. So Britain's got to put its own political dysfunction right first before it could ever possibly dream of rejoining.
Let me ask you before we run out of time. You are British. You live here in Germany. Did Brexit alter your sense of identity?
Somewhat. How I'm perceived here has not changed, other than a few people just asking me, how can the British have been that crazy to have gone through with it that way? But I've maintained all along, and it's still very much true, it's better through this process being a Brit based in Germany than it would be a German citizen based in the UK or any other EU citizen based in the UK, for that matter. So, yeah, I know that my own personal and professional and political future will be here now, whereas before the referendum, maybe returning to Britain one day would have been a possibility. Now that's out of the question, and Brexit was a contributory factor to that.
Well, John, we're glad we've got you on this side of the channel anyway. John Worth,
thank you.
It's always good talking with you. Good to see you here again. 5 years on, concern is growing for at least 150,000 Europeans living in the UK and tens of thousands of Britons residing in the European Union who are on the verge of being classified as undocumented migrants. They stand to lose their citizens' rights, including the right to work, study, and rent property, while some could even face deportation. Now, that's because many have not applied for post-Brexit residency in the countries where they are living. And the deadlines to do so in many countries, well, that deadline is next week. But today in the UK House of Commons, Prime Minister Boris Johnson chose not to focus on those existential risks. Instead, he talked about the benefits of Brexit.
It has allowed us to take back control of the issues that matter to the people of the United Kingdom. It has given us the freedom to establish 8 free ports across the country, driving new investment, to develop the fastest vaccine rollout in Europe, to protect and invest in jobs. Mr. Speaker, over 5.6 million EU citizens have already applied to our EU settlement scheme, and I would encourage anyone who may still be eligible to apply ahead of the deadline next week.
The clock is ticking again. For more on this, I'm joined now by my colleague here, Alex Forrest Whiting. Alex, we've sat here many times talking about Brexit and the fallout. We're doing that again. I thought citizens' rights were supposed to be sorted out between the UK and the EU following Brexit, but that's not the case.
Well, broadly, they were sorted out, but we have to remember that countries can impose different residency rules, and that's what's happened here, with countries such as the UK and France have very tough rules in place. Now, it was agreed that Europeans living in the UK and Britons living in countries across the EU would have the right to remain post-Brexit as long as they registered in time. And as you've just said, for some of those countries, the deadline is next week. So let's just take the UK. There are millions of Europeans living there, several million. Many of them have applied for residency, for so-called settled status, but there are still 400,000 cases that haven't yet been sorted, and on top of that, campaigners are warning that another 150,000 people who haven't even applied for whatever reason, which means that they could well lose all their rights, and that is really worrying those campaigners.
They won't be able to rent, they won't be able to access healthcare, they won't be able to open bank accounts or start a new job. They are even at risk of deportation. We have an absolute catastrophe in the making.
Wow, I mean, that does not sound good. And what about the Brits living across the EU? You, for example.
Yeah, me, for example. Well, it does depend where you live. And one of the countries that does have very tough rules, just like the UK, is France. In France, there are around about 150,000 Brits living there. Now, many of them will be very integrated. They may have lived there for decades, have French families, have jobs, have absolutely no idea that they too have to register, or else they could lose all their rights. And that is, again, worrying many, many people because those people haven't been contacted. And one group, which is called British in Europe, is saying that those governments across the EU should have done much more to warn people what they are about to lose if they do not register.
You have to go out and find these people, the vulnerable, who have absolutely no idea what's about to happen to them, and you have to do what you can. There's a moral obligation on the member states, and not just the UK, to make sure that people know what their rights are and that they're going to lose those rights unless they take an action and a step, and what that step is.
This is terrifying, Alex. What happens next?
Well, campaigners have been pleading for months for governments to be more lenient, and the Netherlands has already agreed to make sure that they keep their residency scheme open until the end of the year, partly because of COVID-19. The British government has just said that they will start issuing 28-day notices to people to warn them that they've got to apply. So they means people have got a few more weeks, but that's not much. And then other countries such as France, well, we haven't heard anything more. So it does mean that there are tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who could suddenly find that their lives have been turned upside down.
But you're in good shape. We're not going to lose you.
Hopefully I'm in good shape.
Our fingers are crossed. Alex Forrest Whiting, as always, Alex, thank you.